Hello, YouTube. Thanks so much for stopping by and checking out my channel. My name is K.A Bloch. My channel name is The Practical Poet, and I am the award-winning author of 4 books of poetry and prose. And my aim with my channel and what I hope to accomplish here is to do a little bit of storytelling through poetry. My poems are a little bit longer than probably most are, and I shouldn't say most are, but there's a lot of shorter type of just a couple verse poems. My poems are fairly lengthy, and they usually do tell a story. Not always, but there's usually some kind of a lesson or a story that I impart. And with all of my books, what I feel makes them a little bit more unique on the poetry market is before each of my poems, I tell a little backstory about the poem. Sometimes it's my motivation, what inspired the poem, my random thoughts, where it originated from, that kind of thing, and kind of give that overview so that the reader knows where I was coming from when I wrote the poem, and they can, agree or disagree or come to their own interpretation, and that's exactly what I hope to happen here. So again, I hope to achieve some storytelling through poetry. And each week I am going to feature a different poem from one of my 4 books. And this week I'm choosing to go in the Wayback Machine. So I'm choosing to go back to probably about the 90s is when I think I wrote this poem. This is the time where I wish I could go back and remind myself to date my poems, because I never put a date on them. I'm always thinking they're were made sometime around the 90s. So in this particular poem, this poem ended up being featured in my first book called Walk Through a Field of Flowers. And this is a collection of poems and short stories inspired by life, love, and some heartache along the way. And the reason that I put some heartache along the way was because a lot of these came from when I was very young. From my time I was a child all the way through about my mid-20s. And, during that age, you're a little bit more romantic, a little bit more idealistic, that kind of thing. So there was probably some heartache or heartbreak, a boyfriend or something like that, broke my heart, and hence the romantic line of some heartache along the way. But basically, this book is a compilation of, like I mentioned, my very young poems that I started writing when I was very young. I could first pick up a pencil, and they're a little bit childish and youthful. And then it gets into some of my more serious poems, such as When My Father Died, or some more serious stuff that happened along the way as I grew up. So until I was about my mid-20s, I wrote a lot, and then I took a little break, actually quite a long break, and then picked up the pen and started writing again most recently, and came out with my last 3 books in the last 3 years. So it's been kind of busy. But going back to this compilation of poems here, like I mentioned, very early, very young poems. And I chose to feature one of the poems in here this week. And this poem is called A Mother's Love. And I remember writing this for my mom one year and presenting her with it on in a frame on some fancy paper that I had back then. I had to probably type it out on a typewriter and backspace with the whiteout, if you remember doing all of that back then. We just didn't have like an edit undo button back then, which would have been so nice. But I do remember typing this up on that nice paper and presenting it to her at some point for Mother's Day. And of course, the waterworks, she was crying and stuff like that, and she loved it. And she hung this poem in her home until she passed away recently. So speaking of her passing away recently, that's one of the reasons that I chose to focus on this poem this week, is because we are approaching in my family the 8th anniversary of her passing, coming up this coming weekend. So of course, pardon me, she's been on my mind a lot. I tend to think back a lot to what was I doing 8 years ago when she was passing away? Where was I? What was going through my mind? I just kind of take that time to reflect on where my head was and what I was going through at that time. So that's one of the reasons that I chose to focus on this. Sorry, I got a little bit of a dry throat. I'm going to take a quick sip of water here. The other reason, that didn't really help, did it? Pardon me for coughing a little bit. The other reason I chose to focus on this poem this week is a couple weeks ago. I don't know if you follow any of those National Day of, National Chocolate Cake Day, every day, National Pet Your Cat Day, same, every day. But this happened to be like National Butterfly and Hummingbird Day. And I thought that was an interesting combination to put those two together. And the reason that I thought that was because during the time of my mom's passing, both of those flying beings, I guess you could call them, brought me a lot of peace and comfort during my mom's final days here on earth. And I wanted to tell that story now. And then, so I'm going to go ahead and talk a little bit about that. Then I'll get into the reading of the poem, A Mother's Love, and then just share some final thoughts. And by the way, all of my books and I keep a blog with printed copies of the poems as I feature them each week. So all of my books are available on my website called the practicalpoet.com /blog or /books. And you can find links to them and then copies of my poems along with a little bit of my backstory, just like I tell it in the book here. So, and again, going back to featuring this poem this week was going back to like 2016 when my mom was first admitted in the hospital. She was in the hospital for several months before she passed away. And at that time, Apple Watches were a fairly new thing. Not many people had them, or if they did, they were, pretty new and people were just getting used to them. And I didn't really want one, although I have an iPhone. I didn't really aspire to have one. But my mom used to make kind of, I'm not gonna say make fun of people, that sounds mean, right? But she used to kind of, they thought, her and my stepdad thought they were kind of cheesy because they would see people at that time. Remember, we could pick up the phone and we could answer it on our wrist. And they would see people doing that in the hospital. They would see the nurses or whatever, like answer the rest and be like, I'll call you back or whatever. And they thought that was funny. And my mom said it was very like James Bond to have that technology right there to walk around speaking on your wrist like that. So a couple months later, I did get an Apple Watch, as you can see here. And I didn't really want to tell them that I got one because I didn't want them to tease me about it. So I, would wear long sleeves or I would cover it up. But one day when I was in the hospital, my phone rang and my purse with my phone in it was halfway across the room. And so I did answer and I said, hang on a minute, I have to go grab my phone. Well, so the jig was up at that time and they started to make fun of me for having this Apple Watch. And then gradually, I'm not a very technical person and you'll see that through my editing. I'm very new here and I haven't yet begun to dive into the editing process, hence the coughing earlier and stuff like that. That won't be edited out. So forgive me for that. I will get better. But I also not very tech savvy when it comes to stuff like my smart TV. I can turn it on really and that's about it. Maybe I can record a program. But when it came to my Apple Watch, I didn't really dive into many of the features when I first got it, including the screensaver. When I first got my Apple Watch, there was a really pretty, I don't know if it's the default screen, but it was just a daytime lake scene with a mountain in the background. And it was beautiful. I liked it. And I didn't realize at the time, I think the water was rippling a little bit. But I was thrilled that later on that night when I looked down and saw that it had changed into the same scene, but now it was nighttime and the moon was shining over the mountain and the lake. And it was so pretty. And I really liked it. And I didn't know that you could even change it to anything else. I just figured, oh, that's lovely, and I'm just going to leave it at that. So I didn't really touch it for months. I just left it at that lake scene. I didn't even know how, like I mentioned, to go in and change this screensaver. So I just left it at that. So now fast forward several months, it's early November, or I guess it was the end of October technically. And my mom was in home hospice and she had a relapse where she could no longer be in home hospice and needed to be relocated to an actual hospice center. So as the ambulance came and transported her, the family followed behind. And when we got to the hospice center, they were busy checking her in and prepping her room and stuff. And we were up at the front desk just kind of talking to some of the nurses up there. And I just wanted to mark the time. I'm kind of just a weird date and time kind of person. I like to know when things happen so I can remember them, I guess, pine on them years later and say, oh, this is what I was doing on this date and this time years ago for some weird reason. But anyway, I just happened to be standing at the desk and I looked down at my Apple Watch. And I gasped, like audibly gasped. I went, oh my gosh. And I think my sister was probably next to me and she looked up and she said, what? And I said, my screen on my Apple Watch has changed to butterflies. And I don't know if you can see that. Maybe you can. I don't know if you can see it with the lights, but it's a butterfly flapping. And my sister says, yeah, so? And I said, I didn't change it. I don't know how to change it. So somehow, from the time that we left my mom's house to follow the ambulance to the hospice center, my Apple Watch changed to butterflies. And I don't know how that happened back then. Now, years later, I do know how to change it. And I have left it at butterflies because I figured somebody wanted me to have butterflies that day, to bring me some peace during that time. And so I'm just going to let it stay on butterflies. I have changed it accidentally. I figured out how, if you press it long enough or something like that, sometimes it automatically changes. But I always bring it back to the butterflies. So that just brought me a lot of comfort. So whoever changed it for me, I'll never know, but I appreciate it because it did make me feel better. It made me feel like maybe my mom was moving into a place of peace, which to me, that's what butterflies symbolize. So that's why they're important. But the other part of that National Day, so it was honoring butterflies and hummingbirds. And I've never been huge on hummingbirds. I mean, they're very pretty, they're lovely, but they've never really been like something that I seek out or know a lot about. A couple of days later, we were at the funeral home, and we had been there a while. And, as those tedious as those things are, I just needed to stretch. And at that exact moment, I got up and I just walked to a random window and I glanced out, and there was probably no less than 8 hummingbirds flying around. And I just stopped and I stared at them for a minute. And I just, again, felt that wash of peace over me, that I had chosen to get up at that time and notice those hummingbirds. Now, to be fair, there was a hummingbird feeder out there, and it was probably maybe in the hummingbird world lunchtime. So they were, of course, milling around there. I understand that. And the naysayers are going to say, of course, there's a hummingbird feeder out there, right? But it was the timing. It was that I chose to get up from my seat at that exact moment. And I chose to go look out that window and notice those hummingbirds and take them for the sign that I think was meant for me. Because I went back a few minutes later and they were all gone. So had I missed that opportunity to get up and go to that window and look out and try and notice those hummingbirds, I never would have known that they were there. So I think something prompted me. I don't know what it was. I mean, if you're not a believer, you may think this is all hooey. I am a believer, as you'll hear in some of my writing. And I do think there are things out there guiding us. And I'll talk more about that in a moment. But it's the fact that I chose to get up at that exact moment and look out that window and take note of those hummingbirds. I could have just been like, oh yeah, they're lovely. But it was the peace that I chose to embrace by looking at those hummingbirds. And some people find that with feathers and pennies and all kinds of different things. It's that you happen to notice it. They're always there. They're out in our world, right? Feathers are everywhere. Birds are everywhere. Pennies are laying down everywhere. But it's when you notice it and when you feel like you were meant to notice it. So if you're walking along and you're looking forward and something prompts you to look down and you see a feather or a penny, and that has some significant meaning to you, there was something that prompted you to look there. And I like to think about the number 1111, which is really big. I see a lot of things written about that if you're into numerology. And a lot of people believe that if you spot the number 1111 or something, I don't know if it's just 1111. I don't know if it works with 1010, 1212. I've always just heard it as 1111. That if you happen to take note of that number, it's kind of a sign that the angels and the guides are with you. And I've been noticing lately a lot of my glance just catching the clock at 11:11. So, and I realize that the clock does hit 11:11 2 times per day, right? But I'm not constantly looking at the clock. I'm not always looking at it going, come on, it's 11:09. I'm going to wait for 11:11. No, it's when you're busy and you're involved in something and you're not even thinking about time, and you just happen to glance up and catch that 11:11. That's the magic in that moment. And that is maybe the lesson that I'm trying to convey, is that it's when we notice these things, when these things, when we take the time to, or when we're not even taking the time, when we're busy and we're involved in something else, but we notice something and we make note of it and we feel like maybe that was there for us. That's where the magic happens. And, maybe again, people don't believe in that, but for me, it's like, what harm is there to believe in that? What harm is there to think that maybe something divinely, oh, maybe you can see it there, changed my watch screen to butterflies, or maybe there was a reason, something that told me, get up and go look out that window right now, because there's something magical out there for you to see, and there's some kind of a sign that was intended for you. And so it's so easy to look for the negative everywhere, right? We can look all around and we can focus on the road rage, or we can focus on people's anger. We can focus on, God forbid, politics or whatever you have. There's so much anger out there, or so much negative, I should say, out there, that if you can catch a glimpse of magic, grab it and hold it close to you, because it's not going to last. And you could always find an excuse to write it off, right? Like I mentioned, the clock always changes, or the clock always displays 11:11 twice a day. There's a hummingbird feeder out there. There could be some explanation. Maybe I was leaning against something, and it pressed on my watch band and changed it to butterflies. But I'm choosing to believe that those things were put there for me to bring me some peace. And so with that, I want to get into the poem here called A Mother's Love. And again, this was written when I was very young. My mother was still alive. This was at the time when you think your mom's going to be around and live forever, right? And we find out very sadly that that's not the case. But the reason that I chose to focus on this along with that story was because just the bonds between a mother and her children, it never dies. She may not be here physically anymore, but I get signs of her all the time and every day. And my dad too, he's passed away as well. And I get a lot of my inspiration from my writing. I'll just get a verse or a line or an idea or something like that will pop into my head like a flashcard. And I know that that's my cue to, if it kind of materializes and hangs around a little bit, I know that's my cue to do something with it. There's some kind of message there that is telling me to do something with that writing. So I take those words. And there's a poem in my third book. The poem is called Guardian Angel, and it talks about those little voices that kind of prompt us, or we hear them, that not in a crazy way, but in a way that says like, hey, maybe take this path instead of that path, or watch this person, or kind of, that little hairs on the back of your neck that stand up. I think those are our guardian angels. So, but anyway, I have talked enough. So I'm going to go ahead and read this poem here called A Mother's Love from Walk Through a Field of Flowers. And I will try not to stumble over words because reading is hard. Put my specs on here. And I hope you enjoy this poem. A Mother's Love. Sometimes you cannot substitute a mother's love and care. You can't replace the tender touch or the smile that's always there. How does she find the time to do the things she needs to do and still have time left in her day to give her love to you? Where does she find the energy to always give so much and let you lean your weight on her as if she was a crutch? No matter where you travel, she's always in your sight to lend a reassuring word that things will be all right. For long ago, inside her body, your life had begun. Although you are two people now, part of you will be one. Long before you saw the world, she realized your worth and loved and cared and nurtured you for months before your birth. As infinite as sun and sky and waves upon the sand, her love, her love is there throughout your life to lend a helping hand. You cannot help but grasp the helping hand that grasps your own. You need that strength from time to time, although you are full grown. You thought you didn't need her when you cut that apron string, but still you need your mother's touch to dry the tears that sting. But never fear, her love is there, come hell or flooding waters, for a mother tends to shower love upon her sons and daughters. But a mother is a person too. She needs love in return. To not take her for granted is a lesson we must learn. So tell your mother thank you. It's not so hard to say. To tell her that you love her is so small a price to pay. It's with these words that I give thanks, and with these words I pray to do the best that I can do to be like her someday. So thank you for listening to that poem. That was A Mother's Love. Just a couple of closing comments on here. Going back to the verse that says, but never fear, her love is there, come hell or flooding waters. Even like I mentioned earlier, even in death, I believe our loved ones are still with us. So it doesn't have to be a physical her being there. I believe that love never dies and the bonds don't die just because somebody passed away. So I feel like her love is always there, even though she physically is not. And then going back to that other verse, so tell your mother thank you. It's not so hard to say, please. If your mom is still alive, if you still have the ability to give her a hug, give her a kiss, tell her thank you. Don't delay on that. Go do that before it's too late. Just just walk up behind her, give her a hug, bring her flowers, tell her thank you. She might look at you strange, like, what's going on with you? Why are you doing this? But it's just nice sometimes to surprisingly show your appreciation to somebody. So I hope that you take that opportunity to do that. And then just finally, the last line on here that says, I want to do the best that I can do to be like her someday. And I never had that opportunity. I didn't have any children other than fur babies. But, I still strive to emulate her and be like her as much as I can. She left her mark on the world just by being kind and helping people out, and her cooking. People still talk about her eggs Benedict, and just, by being a good person, I try to emulate that and I try to pass that along. She was always a very cheerful, positive person. And I hope that maybe through my poems and my storytelling, I can pass a little bit of that along. So with that, I'm going to leave you. So thank you so much for checking in. Again, the book and the poem itself can be located on my blog, thepracticalpoet.com, in either the blog section or the book section. And I hope you will stop by again to hear another poetry reading next week. I'm not sure when I'm going to feature, but I will get it posted as soon as I can. And I really appreciate you looking or listening, and go look for that magic. And don't write it off as, don't poo-poo it. Just embrace it. Because if you see it, it was meant for you to see it. So with that, have a lovely rest of the week, and we'll chat again soon. Thanks. Bye.